The rain poured down as Alex Carter stood stranded, waiting for his driver. Frustrated, he was about to make a run for it when a small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Here, mister," a little girl said, holding out a bright pink umbrella. He took it, his gaze catching on her striking blue eyes, his blue eyes. Then, through the rain, he saw her. The woman he never thought he'd see again. And in that moment, everything changed. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drenching the city streets in a matter of seconds. Alexander Carter had spent the entire day locked in meetings, moving from one business deal to the next without a moment's pause. He had barely looked up from his phone when he stepped outside the towering headquarters of Carter Enterprises, expecting his driver to be waiting as usual. But as soon as he felt the icy rain soak through his tailored suit, he realized something was wrong. His driver was late. Cursing under his breath, Alex glanced around for shelter, but the storm had already flooded the sidewalks. People hurried past him, their umbrellas barely holding up against the wind. His office building was behind him, but walking back inside would mean enduring the stares of his employees, *** the CEO, caught in the rain like an ordinary man ***. He didn't like appearing vulnerable, not even in something as trivial as bad weather. Then, just as he was about to make a run for it, a small figure caught his attention. A little girl stood near the entrance of a small convenience store, huddled under an awning. She couldn't have been older than 6, with long, dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. Her blue eyes, bright and clear, stood out against the gloom of the storm. She clutched a tiny pink umbrella in her hands, one that was clearly meant for a child, not an adult. Alex wouldn't have stopped if she hadn't moved toward him. "Here, mister," she said softly, stretching the umbrella toward him. "You'll get all wet." Alex blinked, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected gesture. He wasn't used to people helping him, especially not strangers, especially not a child. He glanced at the tiny umbrella, then at the girl, who was looking up at him with nothing but quiet kindness. "You'll get wet," he pointed out, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. She shrugged, as if it didn't matter. "I can wait for my mommy under the awning." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. There was a quiet confidence in her voice, the kind that came from a child who had learned to take care of herself in ways she probably shouldn't have. He hesitated only a moment before taking the umbrella, holding it carefully above his head. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily." He nodded, glancing toward the store. "And where's your mom?" "She works here," Lily answered, pointing toward the convenience store behind her. "She's inside, but she'll be out soon." Alex looked through the rain-streaked glass. The store was small, barely more than a corner shop, and from what he could tell, only one person was working inside. He couldn't see her clearly, but something about the situation unsettled him. He had never thought much about the people who worked in places like this, people who spent hours behind counters while the rest of the city rushed past them without a second glance. He exhaled, adjusting his grip on the tiny umbrella. "Your mom works late?" Lily nodded. "Sometimes. I wait for her here, but it's okay. I don't mind." Alex felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He didn't know why it bothered him so much, why he was standing here having a conversation with a child in the middle of a storm. But something about her, about the way she spoke so matter-of-factly, about the way she had handed him an umbrella without expecting anything in return, made it impossible for him to walk away. For a man who had spent years building walls around himself, it was an unfamiliar feeling. Before he could say anything else, the door to the store swung open. And the moment he saw the woman who stepped outside, everything inside him froze. His breath caught in his throat, his grip tightening instinctively around the umbrella. Because standing there, looking just as stunned as he felt, was Hannah White. A woman he hadn't seen in 6 years. A woman who had disappeared without a trace. And in that instant, as his gaze flicked from her to Lily, realization slammed into him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just any little girl. This was his daughter. Hannah froze the moment her eyes met Alex's. For a second, she looked as if she might turn and run, but then her gaze flicked to Lily, standing beside him with the small pink umbrella still clutched in her hands. The color drained from her face, and she took an unsteady breath as she stepped forward, her arms instinctively reaching for her daughter. "Lily, sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" Her voice was soft but tight, like she was struggling to stay composed. Lily smiled up at her. "Mommy, I gave him my umbrella. He was getting all wet." Hannah's jaw tightened as she turned her attention back to Alex. "I see that." Alex barely heard her. His mind was still reeling from the shock of seeing her again, from the storm of emotions crashing inside him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as his eyes flickered between Hannah and Lily. The resemblance was undeniable. The same soft brown waves, the same delicate features. But it was the eyes that sealed it. Bright, striking blue. His blue. His entire body went rigid as the realization sank in. Lily wasn't just any little girl. She was his. A wave of anger surged inside him, colliding with the shock that had left him frozen in place. He gripped the umbrella tightly, forcing himself to breathe, to focus. He had 1,000 questions, but none of them seemed to make it past the lump in his throat. Hannah shifted uncomfortably under his stare. "Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It had been 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of not knowing. 6 years, and she had never told him. "Is she mine?" His voice was lower than he intended, steady but filled with something raw and unfiltered. Hannah's breath hitched. Lily looked between them, confusion flickering across her face. "Mommy?" Hannah knelt down beside her daughter, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "Why don't you go inside, sweetheart? I'll be there in just a minute." Lily hesitated, glancing up at Alex one last time before nodding. She handed him the umbrella with a bright smile. "You can keep this, mister." Something about the way she said it made his chest ache. He forced a smile, his voice gentler when he spoke to her. "Thank you, Lily." She gave him a small wave before stepping into the store. The moment the door shut behind her, the air between him and Hannah grew heavy. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one building inside him. "Answer me," he said, his voice sharper now. "Is she mine?" Hannah let out a slow, shaky breath. "Yes." The word hit him like a physical blow. He took a step back, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. 1,000 emotions fought for dominance: anger, shock, disbelief, grief for the years he had lost. "You never told me." His voice was quiet, but it wasn't soft. Hannah's fingers curled into fists. "I wanted to." He let out a bitter laugh. "But you didn't." She flinched. "Do you have any idea what you took from me?" His voice was rising now, his composure slipping. 6 years, Hannah. 6 years of her life that I'll never get back." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, forcing herself to stay strong. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Alex's jaw clenched. "The right thing? Keeping my daughter from me?" Tears threatened to spill over, but she shook her head. "You don't understand, Alex. You weren't," she exhaled sharply, gripping the sleeves of her coat. "You weren't the kind of man who wanted a family. Back then, everything was about your career, your company, your next deal. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd resent me for it." He stared at her in disbelief. "So instead, you just disappeared." "I didn't know what else to do." Alex let out a slow breath, trying to steady himself, but the rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface. He had spent years believing Hannah had simply walked away, never knowing that she had been carrying his child. His daughter. A small part of him whispered that maybe she had been right, maybe the man he was back then wouldn't have been ready. But none of that mattered now. Because he was ready now. He straightened, his voice quieter but firm. I want to know her. Hannah hesitated. Alex. I'm not asking, Hannah. His voice was unwavering, his decision already made. She's my daughter, and I'm not walking away from this. Hannah's lips parted slightly, as if she had expected a different reaction. For a moment, she just looked at him, searching his face, trying to read what lay beneath his anger. Then she swallowed, nodding slowly. Okay. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Alex had spent his entire life making calculated decisions. Every business move, every strategic partnership, every investment, he had built his empire by staying in control. But now, for the first time, he was walking into something completely unknown. He had a daughter. A 6-year-old little girl with blue eyes that mirrored his own. A child who had been living her life without him, completely unaware that somewhere out in the world, she had a father. He barely remembered how he got home that night. His mind was racing, thoughts colliding as he tried to process everything. He had been so focused on his work, on expanding his business, on building a future that he thought mattered. And all along, this had been the future he never even knew he had. When Hannah had agreed to let him be a part of Lily's life, he could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't trust him yet, and he couldn't blame her. As much as he resented the fact that she had kept Lily a secret from him, he also knew that Hannah had been right about one thing: back then, he probably wouldn't have been ready. But now? Now there was nothing in the world that mattered more than making up for the time he had lost. The next morning, he found himself standing outside the small coffee shop where he and Hannah had agreed to meet. It was a quiet place, tucked between a row of local businesses, nothing like the upscale restaurants he was used to. He wasn't sure what to expect when he stepped inside, but as soon as he spotted them sitting by the window, something inside him shifted. Lily was coloring on a napkin with a red crayon, completely focused on whatever picture she was creating. Hannah sat beside her, a coffee cup in her hands, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. For a brief second, she looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure if he would actually show up. He stepped forward, hesitating for only a moment before pulling out the chair across from them. Lily looked up, her blue eyes filled with curiosity but not hesitation. She didn't know who he was yet, didn't realize that the man sitting across from her was supposed to be someone important in her life. Hannah cleared her throat. Lily, do you remember the man from last night? The one who helped you with your umbrella? Lily nodded. The one who got all wet. Alex smirked. Yeah, that was me. Lily tilted her head. You look drier today. He chuckled. That's usually the goal. Hannah let out a quiet breath before turning to her daughter. Sweetheart, there's something really important I need to tell you. Lily put her crayon down, sensing the shift in her mother's tone. She looked up, waiting. Hannah hesitated for only a moment before speaking. Alex, he's your dad. The words hung in the air, almost too heavy to process. Alex held his breath, watching Lily closely, searching for any sign of understanding. For a few seconds, she just stared at him, her little brows furrowed in thought. Then she asked, Really? Alex nodded, his voice softer than he expected. Yeah. Really? Lily blinked, then turned back to Hannah. Like a real dad? Hannah swallowed. Yes, baby. Like a real dad. Lily's small fingers curled around the napkin she had been coloring on. She looked at Alex again, studying him with the same focus she had given her drawing just moments ago. Where have you been? The question hit him harder than he expected. He glanced at Hannah, who looked down at her coffee, as if she couldn't bring herself to say anything. Alex inhaled deeply. I didn't know about you, Lily. If I had, I would have been here sooner. Lily didn't say anything right away. She just stared at him with those wide, knowing eyes, and for a second, he wondered if she would tell him to go away. Then, just as quickly as she had gone quiet, she picked up her crayon again and slid the napkin across the table toward him. "You can color with me if you want." The breath he hadn't realized he was holding finally escaped. He picked up the crayon, turning it between his fingers before glancing at Hannah. She was watching them closely, her expression unreadable. Lily tapped the napkin. "But don't mess it up." A slow smile spread across Alex's face. "I'll do my best." As he leaned forward and started to color, he realized something. This wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't going to magically make up for 6 years in a single conversation. But Lily wasn't pushing him away. And that was more than he could have hoped for. Alex hadn't known what to expect after that first meeting with Lily. He had walked into the cafe feeling like a stranger, uncertain if she would even want to speak to him, but when she handed him that crayon and told him not to mess up her drawing, something shifted. She had let him in, even if just a little. That small moment had been enough to convince him of one thing: he wasn't going anywhere. The next day, he found himself standing outside the small apartment building where Hannah and Lily lived. It was nothing like the luxury high-rises he was used to, but it was well kept, with flower pots lining the small balconies and the faint sounds of a television drifting from an open window. He hadn't been invited over, not exactly, but after leaving the cafe the day before, Hannah had reluctantly agreed to let him spend more time with Lily. As he raised his hand to knock, he hesitated. This wasn't a boardroom, and there was no contract to negotiate. This was his daughter, a child he had never known, and now he was standing on her doorstep, hoping to earn a place in her life. He took a slow breath and knocked twice. The door opened a moment later, and Hannah stood there, looking both surprised and wary. She glanced at the time on her phone before looking back at him. "You're early." Alex smirked slightly. "I figured that was better than being late." She sighed but stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small but cozy. The walls were lined with colorful drawings, some framed and some taped up haphazardly. A few stuffed animals were scattered on the couch, and there was a faint smell of something sweet in the air, cookies, maybe. "Lily's in her room," Hannah said, crossing her arms. "She doesn't know you're here yet." Alex nodded, running a hand through his hair. "How is she?" Hannah hesitated. "Quiet. She's thinking about things. She asks a lot of questions, but that's just how she is." He could hear the protective edge in her voice. She wasn't going to let him hurt their daughter, not emotionally, not in any way. And even though he was still furious that she had kept Lily from him for so long, he respected that about her. She had raised their child alone, and that couldn't have been easy. "I just want a chance, Hannah," he said, his voice low but steady. "That's all I'm asking for." She studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right. You can go in." He followed her down the short hallway until they reached a small bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Lily was sitting on the floor, carefully arranging a row of dolls in a neat line. She hadn't noticed them yet, too focused on whatever imaginary world she was creating. Hannah cleared her throat gently. "Lily, sweetheart, you have a visitor." Lily looked up, her blue eyes widening slightly when she saw Alex standing in the doorway. She stared at him for a moment before tilting her head. "You're back." Alex smiled, stepping inside. "I said I would be." She considered that for a second, then nodded as if approving of his answer. "Wanna help?" She gestured toward the dolls. "We're having a tea party, but one of them doesn't have a seat." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" Lily pointed to a doll with curly brown hair and a bright yellow dress. "Her. She's new, so she doesn't know where to sit yet." Something about the way she said it made his chest ache. Slowly, he lowered himself onto the floor, sitting across from her. "Well, I think we can figure that out." Lily handed him the doll, watching carefully as he adjusted her place in the lineup. She studied his work for a moment, then nodded in approval. That's better. Hannah leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a small but unreadable smile on her lips. Alex caught her watching but said nothing. He knew what she was thinking. She was trying to figure out if he was serious about this, if he was really going to be there, or if he would walk away the moment things got hard. He wasn't going anywhere. Lily poured imaginary tea into tiny plastic cups, then handed him one. You have to hold it fancy, she instructed, demonstrating by lifting her pinky in the air. Alex smirked, mirroring her movements. Like this? She giggled. Yeah. That's the fancy way. For the first time since meeting her, he saw something different in her expression. Trust. It wasn't big, not yet, but it was there. And for the first time in his life, nothing in the world felt more important than earning it. Alex had spent his entire life making deals, building an empire, and ensuring that nothing was ever left to chance. Yet, somehow, he had found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor of a 6-year-old's bedroom, carefully balancing a plastic teacup between his fingers as he took part in an imaginary tea party. It was surreal, and yet, at the same time, it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. Lily was completely in her element. She arranged her dolls in precise positions, adjusting their tiny plastic cups and making sure each one had an equal amount of pretend tea. Every now and then, she would glance up at him, as if gauging his participation, silently deciding if he was truly playing along or just humoring her. Are you having fun? She asked, her small hands smoothing out the skirt of her favorite doll. Alex set his cup down carefully and nodded. I think this might be the fanciest tea party I've ever been to. Lily giggled, clearly pleased with his response. It's 'cause I planned it really well, she said proudly. Only the best tea parties have cookies, but we ran out. Alex glanced toward Hannah, who was leaning against the doorframe, watching them with her arms crossed. He could see the way she was studying him, the way her expression flickered between amusement and hesitation. She was waiting to see if he would break, if he would get bored and decide that playing pretend with a child wasn't worth his time. She didn't know that nothing in his life had ever felt more important. I think I can fix that, he said, turning back to Lily. What if we go out and get some real cookies? Lily's eyes lit up instantly. Really? Alex nodded. Absolutely. But you have to promise to pick the best ones. She grinned. I always pick the best ones. Hannah straightened slightly, her expression shifting into something more cautious. Alex. He met her gaze, sensing her hesitation. She was still trying to protect Lily, still trying to figure out if this was all temporary. He couldn't blame her for that. I just want to take her to get some cookies, he said softly. Nothing more. Hannah exhaled, her fingers tightening around her sleeves. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. Okay. Lily cheered and immediately grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the door with more strength than he expected for someone so small. Let's go, let's go. He let her drag him along, a small chuckle escaping as he followed her outside. Hannah grabbed her coat and keys, clearly not letting them go anywhere without her, and within minutes, they were walking down the street toward a small bakery a few blocks away. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still damp, and the sky was streaked with the last hints of fading sunlight. Lily practically skipped ahead, holding on to both of their hands as she swung her arms excitedly. I like this place, she said, pointing at the bakery as they approached. They have sprinkle cookies. Alex smiled. That sounds like the best kind. Lily nodded seriously. They are. When they stepped inside, the smell of fresh bread and sugar filled the air. Lily immediately pressed her hands against the glass display case, scanning the rows of cookies with intense concentration. The young woman behind the counter smiled at her before glancing up at Alex. She looks like she means business, the woman said with a small laugh. Alex smirked. She's a professional. Lily turned to him with an exaggeratedly serious nod. You have to pick wisely. He crouched down beside her, lowering his voice as if they were making a top-secret decision. Which ones are the winners? Lily pointed at a tray near the center. The sprinkle ones. And maybe the chocolate chip. Alex stood and gestured to the employee. We'll take a dozen of both. Lily's face lit up, and Hannah, who had been watching quietly, shook her head with a small smile. You're going to spoil her. Alex glanced at her. She deserves it. Something flickered in Hannah's expression, something softer, but she didn't argue. Once the cookies were packed into a small box, Alex handed the bag to Lily. She held it carefully, like it was something precious, and for a moment, she just stared up at him, as if trying to understand something. Hey, mister, she asked after a moment. Alex raised an eyebrow. Yeah. She hesitated, shifting on her feet. Are you gonna be here tomorrow? His chest tightened, and he didn't hesitate for a second. Yes. Lily studied him for another moment before nodding as if deciding to believe him. Then she grabbed his hand again. Okay. Let's go eat cookies. As they walked back to the apartment, Alex felt something settle inside him. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. This was the beginning of something real. Alex had always believed that relationships, whether in business or life, were built on trust. But trust wasn't something that happened overnight. It had to be earned, piece by piece, moment by moment. And right now, he was standing in the middle of Hannah's small kitchen, realizing just how much work he had ahead of him. Lily was sitting at the table, happily munching on a sprinkle cookie, her feet swinging beneath the chair. Her hands were already covered in crumbs, but she didn't seem to care. She looked completely at ease, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to have him sitting across from her. Hannah, on the other hand, was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching him carefully. She hadn't said much since they got back from the bakery. She was letting him be here, letting him spend time with Lily, but the tension in her shoulders told him that she was still waiting for something to go wrong. Lily took another bite of her cookie and tilted her head at him. Do you have a house? Alex blinked at the unexpected question. Yeah, I do. Her brows furrowed slightly. Is it a big house? He hesitated before answering. It's pretty big. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Is it lonely? The question hit him harder than it should have. He had never thought of his house that way before. It was sleek, modern, and meticulously designed, but it had never felt lonely to him, at least, not until now. Sometimes, he admitted. Lily licked some frosting off her fingers, considering his answer. You should get a fish. Alex chuckled. A fish? She nodded, completely serious. Yeah. They don't talk, but they're good company. Hannah let out a quiet laugh from the counter. Lily has a thing for fish. Lily beamed. I do. They're my favorite. Alex leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. What if I don't know how to take care of a fish? Lily gasped, as if he had just admitted something scandalous. That's so easy. You just feed them and talk to them so they don't feel sad. He smirked. So I'd have to talk to the fish? Lily nodded, then reached for another cookie. Yeah. Otherwise, they get lonely, too. Something about her innocence, her simple logic, made his chest tighten. He had spent years surrounding himself with the most powerful people in the world, people who spoke in deals and contracts and negotiations. But here was this tiny girl, casually explaining to him that loneliness could be solved with something as simple as talking to a fish. Hannah finally spoke. She's got a point. You do tend to talk to yourself when you're thinking. Alex glanced at her. That's different. Hannah shrugged. Not to a fish. Lily giggled, delighted by the idea. Alex let out a slow breath, watching the two of them interact. They had their own rhythm, their own little world that he was only now stepping into. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted in. Maybe I'll get one, he said finally. Lily clapped her hands. Can I help you pick it? Alex smiled. Of course. She grinned, completely satisfied with this turn of events. Hannah shook her head, but there was something softer in her expression now, something less guarded. Alex leaned back in his chair, watching Lily as she happily talked about all the different kinds of fish they could get. She was letting him in, little by little. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to rush a single second of it. Alex had never thought a trip to a pet store would feel like such an important moment in his life. Yet here he was, walking beside Lily as she led him through the aisles, her small hand wrapped tightly around his. She was practically bouncing with excitement, her eyes scanning the tanks filled with different kinds of fish, pointing at each one as if she were a seasoned expert. That one's too small, she said, stopping in front of a tank filled with tiny neon fish. And that one swims too fast. She pointed to another. And that one looks grumpy. Alex smirked, glancing down at her. Grumpy? Lily nodded seriously. Yeah. You don't want a grumpy fish. They don't like company. He bit back a laugh, glancing at Hannah, who was watching them with amused eyes. She had stayed mostly quiet during the trip, letting Lily take charge. It was obvious she was still processing how quickly things had changed in the past week, how suddenly Alex had become part of their world. He knew she was waiting for him to mess up, to back out, to decide this was too much for him. He wasn't going anywhere. Lily gasped suddenly, tugging on his hand. That one. She pressed her little hands against the glass of a tank near the center of the aisle. Inside, a small blue betta fish swam lazily, its fins trailing behind it like silk. Alex crouched beside her. Why that one? Lily grinned. Because he looks fancy. And he's blue, like our eyes. Something in his chest tightened at her words. Hannah exhaled softly from behind them. You're really doing this, huh? Alex turned to look at her. You sound surprised. She shifted slightly, crossing her arms. I guess I am. I just didn't think you were the type to get a pet. Alex glanced back at Lily, who was now happily talking to the fish through the glass. I wasn't, he admitted. But I also wasn't the type to have a daughter. Things change. Hannah's expression softened, but she didn't say anything. A few minutes later, the employee carefully scooped the fish into a small plastic bag, handing it to Lily. She cradled it carefully, looking up at Alex with bright eyes. He needs a name. Alex thought for a moment. What about Finn? Lily tilted her head. Finn. She said the name a few times, testing it out before nodding. I like it. As they walked toward the checkout, Alex noticed how naturally Lily held onto his hand now, as if she had always done it. It was such a simple thing, but it meant more to him than he could explain. Hannah must have noticed too, because when he glanced at her, she was watching them with something unreadable in her eyes. After they paid for the fish and all the supplies they needed, they walked back outside, the cool afternoon breeze brushing against them. Lily skipped ahead slightly, holding the bag with Finn carefully in both hands. Alex turned to Hannah, his voice lower so Lily wouldn't hear. You still don't believe I'm staying, do you? Hannah sighed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I want to, Alex. But I've done this on my own for 6 years. I don't know how to just let you in. Alex didn't hesitate. Then let me prove it to you. She looked up at him, her brown eyes searching his, looking for something, maybe reassurance, maybe certainty. Finally, she nodded. Okay. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a promise wrapped in flowery words. But it was a step. And that was all he needed. The following week, Alex found himself standing in Hannah's small apartment, carefully watching as Lily leaned over the fish tank, her nose nearly pressed against the glass. Finn, now settled into his new home, swam lazily through the water, oblivious to the importance of his presence. Lily had spent almost an hour making sure everything was perfect, placing the tiny decorations exactly where she wanted them, adjusting the water temperature with Hannah's help, and even whispering to Finn to make sure he felt welcome. Alex had never seen a child so invested in something so small. But maybe it wasn't just about the fish. Maybe this was her way of processing everything, of adjusting to the fact that she suddenly had a father in her life. Hannah leaned against the kitchen counter, watching from a distance. She had been quieter than usual that evening, and Alex could tell she was still struggling with the shift in their lives. She had spent 6 years believing she had to do this on her own. Letting him in wasn't going to happen overnight. Lily finally turned away from the fish tank and skipped over to the couch, climbing up beside Alex without hesitation. The first time he had come here, she had been hesitant, keeping her distance, watching him carefully as if trying to figure out if he was real. Now, she flopped down next to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. She leaned her head against his arm, letting out a small sigh. Finn likes his new home. Alex smiled. I think so too. She glanced up at him. You'll take good care of him, right? He nodded. Of course. You'll have to check on him sometimes, though. Make sure I'm doing everything right. Lily grinned. I can do that. Hannah walked over then, sitting down on the other side of the couch. She didn't say anything at first, just watched Lily as she rested against Alex. There was something vulnerable in her eyes, something that told him she was still afraid to believe this was real. Lily yawned, her tiny fingers curling into the sleeve of his shirt. Can we do this again tomorrow? Alex felt something tighten in his chest. Before he could answer, Hannah spoke. Not tomorrow, sweetheart. Alex has work. Lily frowned slightly, but she didn't pull away. Will you come back after? Alex met Hannah's gaze over their daughter's head. He knew what she was waiting for, knew that this was the moment that truly mattered. I'll be here, he said firmly. Every day. As long as you want me to be. Lily considered his words for a moment before smiling, satisfied. Hannah exhaled slowly, glancing down at her hands before finally speaking. I'm trying to believe this is real, she admitted softly. Alex reached over, resting his hand lightly over hers. It is. She looked up at him then, and for the first time since he had found out the truth, he saw something shift in her expression. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Hope. Lily's small voice broke the silence. Daddy. Alex's breath caught. He had heard her call him that once before, but this time, it was different. This time, it felt like she knew. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. Yeah, sweetheart. Lily yawned again, her eyes fluttering closed as she snuggled closer to him. I'm glad you're here. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, letting those words settle deep in his chest. He had spent his entire life building something that he thought mattered. He had believed success was measured in power, in wealth, in control. But sitting here, with his daughter curled up against him, with Hannah finally letting her walls crack just a little, he realized he had been wrong. This was what mattered. And he wasn't going to waste another second of it. The ending of this story is both heartwarming and deeply satisfying because it's not just about Alex discovering he has a daughter, it's about redemption, second chances, and the power of choosing family. Alex starts as a man who seemingly has everything, wealth, power, and control, but through Lily, he realizes that none of it compares to what he's been missing. His journey isn't just about claiming a title as her father, it's about proving, through actions rather than words, that he is someone who will show up, day after day, no matter what. Hannah's role is just as vital. She isn't just an obstacle or a love interest, she's a mother who has spent 6 years protecting her daughter the only way she knew how. Her hesitation isn't about punishing Alex but about ensuring Lily isn't hurt. Watching her slowly let him in, allowing herself to hope again, is just as powerful as Alex's transformation. But the real heart of the story is Lily. She's the bridge between them, the innocent soul who simply wants love and stability. Her quiet trust, her willingness to accept Alex without question, and the simple way she calls him Daddy at the end, that is what makes the resolution so emotional. This isn't a story about a man who suddenly becomes a father overnight. It's about earning that place, about healing old wounds, and about realizing that family isn't about the time you've lost, but about the moments you refuse to miss moving forward. The final scene, where Lily falls asleep against Alex, is a perfect representation of that. It's not dramatic, it's not grand, it's just real. And sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that mean the most.